How uncertainty keeps people passive. A manager sends a message to her team on a Friday afternoon. Hey everyone, just a heads up. We're going to be making some changes to how things are structured. More details coming soon. Have a great weekend. The message sits in the channel. No one responds. But the weekend is different now. People check their phones more. They wonder what changes means. They think about whether this affects them. They wonder if they should ask. They decide not to. They tell themselves it's probably nothing. But they keep thinking about it. On Monday, no follow-up comes. People work, they wait, they watch the manager's calendar. They notice when she's in a closed-door meeting. They wonder if that's when the decision is being made. They still don't ask. Tuesday morning, someone finally sends a message. Hey, any update on the changes you mentioned? The manager replies an hour later. Still sorting through a few things. We'll share when we have something final. The person who asked now feels awkward. Like they were pushy, like they should have just waited. No one else asks after that. A week goes by, then two. Work continues, people do their jobs, but they also hold back a little. They don't start big projects. They don't make plans that go too far into the future. They don't push back on things they normally would push back on. They keep their heads down. When the announcement finally comes, it's smaller than anyone expected. A change in reporting structure. It doesn't affect most people. But by then, something has already happened. For 3 weeks, people were careful. They were quiet. They waited. And that waiting became its own kind of behavior. This is what uncertainty does. It doesn't need to threaten anyone directly. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to exist. And once it exists, it changes how people move. What uncertainty does? Uncertainty is not the same as danger. Danger is clear. You know what the threat is. You know what might happen. You can prepare. You can respond. Uncertainty is different. It means you don't know what might happen. You don't know if something bad is coming or not. You don't know if you should act or wait. You don't know what the right move is. And when people don't know what the right move is, they often don't move at all. This isn't laziness, it isn't fear exactly. It's a kind of paralysis that happens when the cost of acting wrong feels higher than the cost of doing nothing. Uncertainty works because it puts people in a position where every option feels risky. If you speak up, you might look paranoid. If you don't speak up, you might miss something important. If you ask questions, you might seem needy. If you don't ask questions, you might be left out. So people wait, they watch. They try to figure out what's happening by reading signals. And while they're doing that, they stay passive. This is how uncertainty controls behavior without anyone giving an order. How uncertainty gets created. Uncertainty doesn't have to be intentional, but it can be. And when someone controls information, they control uncertainty. Here's how it forms. Someone has information that other people need. They don't share it, or they share part of it, or they share it in a way that raises more questions than it answers. The people who don't have the information are now in a different position. They're waiting. They're guessing. They're trying to prepare for something they can't see. A boss tells their team that budget conversations are happening. They don't say when. They don't say what's being discussed. They don't say who's involved. Just that it's happening. Now the team is in a fog. They don't know if their jobs are safe. They don't know if their projects will continue. They don't know if they should be worried or not. They could ask, but asking feels dangerous. If they ask and the boss says everything is fine, they'll look like they were panicking. If they ask and the boss says it's complicated, they'll know even less than before. So they don't ask, they wait. And while they wait, they change how they behave. They stop making long-term plans. They stop pushing for new ideas. They become more agreeable. They avoid conflict. They do what's expected and nothing more. The boss hasn't threatened anyone. They haven't said anything mean. They haven't punished anyone. They just withheld clarity. And that withholding was enough. This is how uncertainty becomes a tool. Not because someone is cruel, but because the absence of information creates a space where people become cautious. How it shows up in communication. When uncertainty exists, communication changes, not in big, obvious ways, in small adjustments that add up. People stop asking direct questions. They ask softer ones. They add more qualifiers. They apologize before speaking. Instead of saying, "What's the plan?" they say, "Do you have a sense of what we might be doing?" Instead of saying, "I need to know," they say, "Whenever you get a chance, if you have any updates, that would be great." The wording is different. The energy is different. The request is the same, but it's wrapped in so much caution that it barely feels like a request at all. This happens because people are trying not to seem demanding. They're trying not to seem like they're overreacting. They're trying not to make the uncertainty worse by appearing like they can't handle it. But the softness of the question makes it easier to ignore. And when it gets ignored, the uncertainty grows. The person on the other side of the conversation, the one who has the information, can now choose how much to share. They can give a vague answer. They can delay. They can say they don't know yet. And because the question was asked so gently, none of those responses feel like a refusal. A worker asks their manager, "Do we know if the new policy affects our department?" The manager replies, "I'm still getting clarity on that myself." That answer doesn't say yes. It doesn't say no. It doesn't say when the worker will find out. But it sounds reasonable. It sounds like the manager is also waiting. So the worker doesn't push. They accept the non-answer, and they go back to waiting. This is what uncertainty does to language. It makes questions weaker. It makes answers vaguer. It turns conversations into exchanges where nothing gets resolved, but both people feel like they tried. How it changes behavior on both sides. The person who doesn't have information becomes more passive. The person who does have information, whether they realize it or not, becomes more powerful. The worker starts checking in more often. They send little messages. They look for signals. They become hyper-aware of tone and timing. They try to guess what's happening based on how quickly someone responds or whether they use a period or an exclamation point. They're not doing this because they're anxious by nature. They're doing it because they're operating without a map. And when you don't have a map, you look for clues. The manager, meanwhile, might not notice any of this. To them, the worker seems fine. They responded to the update calmly. They didn't complain. They didn't ask too many questions. The manager assumes everything is okay. But the worker isn't okay. They're just quiet. And their quietness looks like acceptance. This is one of the reasons uncertainty works so well. It creates behavior that looks like compliance. The person who is uncertain becomes careful. They stay polite. They don't make waves. From the outside, it looks like they're handling things well. But inside, they're stuck. They're not moving forward. They're not making decisions. They're just waiting for the fog to clear. And if the person with the information delays long enough, the person without it starts to assume the worst. They fill in the blanks. They imagine scenarios, and those imagined scenarios are often worse than the truth. A team is told that leadership is reviewing everyone's performance. No timeline is given. No criteria are shared. Just that it's happening. People start to assume they're being evaluated constantly. They become more careful in meetings. They second-guess their work. They avoid taking risks. They stop sharing half-formed ideas. The review might be routine. It might not even affect most people. But because no one knows, everyone adjusts their behavior as if it's serious. The absence of information creates a space where people's minds do the rest of the work. And in that space, caution becomes the default. How people can misread what's happening. When someone becomes passive under uncertainty, other people often misread why. They see the quietness. They see the lack of initiative. They see the hesitation. And they assume it's a personality trait. They're not a self-starter. They're not confident. They don't take ownership. But the behavior isn't coming from the person's character. It's coming from the situation. The person is reacting to a lack of clarity. They're not passive because they don't care. They're passive because they don't know what's safe. A new employee joins a team. On their first day, they're told the company is going through some transitions. No one explains what that means. No one tells them what's changing or when. Just that things are in flux. The new employee becomes cautious. They don't suggest new ideas. They don't ask too many questions. They wait to see how things work before they speak up. After a few months, their manager says they're not showing enough initiative. The manager sees someone who's holding back. The employee sees someone trying to survive in a situation they don't understand. Neither person is wrong, but they're seeing different things. The manager is seeing behavior. The employee is seeing context. This is what makes uncertainty so effective. It changes how people act, but it doesn't change how others see them. The behavior gets noticed. The cause doesn't. And once someone is labeled as passive or timid or lacking confidence, that label sticks. Even if the uncertainty goes away, the reputation stays. How silence becomes information. When uncertainty exists, silence starts to mean something. If someone doesn't respond to a message right away, the person waiting assumes something is wrong. If a boss doesn't make eye contact in a meeting, people assume they're upset. If a decision keeps getting delayed, people assume the news is bad. This happens because people need to make sense of what's happening, and when they don't have facts, they use silence as data. A manager stops replying to a worker's emails as quickly as they used to. The worker notices. They wonder if they did something wrong. They start reviewing their recent work. They think about conversations they had. They try to figure out what changed. Maybe the manager is just busy. Maybe they're dealing with something unrelated. Maybe nothing is wrong at all. But the worker doesn't know that. So they assume the worst, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. They become more careful. They double-check their work. They avoid asking for help. The manager, meanwhile, has no idea this is happening. To them, nothing has changed. They are just responding to emails when they have time. But the worker is now operating in a completely different emotional space. This is what silence does when uncertainty is present. It fills the gaps. It becomes evidence of something, even when it's evidence of nothing. And once that happens, people stop acting on what's real. They start acting on what they imagine is real. And their behavior reflects that imagined reality more than the actual one. How uncertainty spreads through groups. Uncertainty doesn't stay isolated. It moves through teams, through organizations, through social groups. One person hears something vague. They mention it to someone else. That person mentions it to someone else. Each time the message gets a little less clear. Each time the uncertainty grows. A manager tells one person that there might be changes coming. That person tells their coworker there are changes coming. The coworker tells someone else that big changes are happening. By the time it reaches the fifth person, it sounds like layoffs are imminent. No one lied, no one exaggerated on purpose, but the uncertainty multiplied with each retelling, and now the whole team is acting like something serious is about to happen, even though the original message was just a vague possibility. This is how uncertainty becomes collective. It doesn't take much. Just a few unclear messages, a few delayed answers, a few conversations that end without resolution. And once a group is uncertain together, the behavior changes across the board. Meetings become quieter. People stop volunteering for projects. Innovation slows down. Everyone is waiting to see what happens next. The work still gets done, but it gets done carefully, safely, with less energy, with less risk. And from the outside, this can look like a team that's disengaged. But they're not disengaged. They're just stuck in a fog. And they're waiting for someone to turn on a light. How some people use uncertainty on purpose. Not all uncertainty is accidental. Some people learn that keeping others uncertain gives them more control. They realize that when people don't know what's happening, they become easier to manage. They ask for less. They push back less. They accept vague answers. A boss learns that if they give a timeline, people will hold them to it. If they don't give a timeline, people just wait. So they stop giving timelines. A partner learns that if they're clear about their plans, their partner might disagree. If they stay vague, their partner doesn't know what to push back on. So they stay vague. A colleague learns that if they commit to something, they'll be held accountable. If they say they're still figuring it out, people leave them alone. So they keep figuring it out. This isn't always calculated. Sometimes people just drift into this pattern because it works. They notice that vagueness buys them time, that delayed answers reduce pressure, that uncertainty keeps people from making demands. And once they notice that, they keep doing it. The person on the other side doesn't usually see this as manipulation. They just see someone who's busy, someone who's thoughtful, someone who doesn't want to make promises they can't keep. But the effect is the same. The person without information stays passive. The person with information stays in control. And the longer this goes on, the more normal it feels. The person waiting stops expecting clarity. They stop asking for it. They adjust to the fog. And the fog becomes the relationship. How uncertainty becomes permanent. The most dangerous thing about uncertainty is that it can last indefinitely. Danger eventually resolves. You find out if the threat was real. You deal with it or you don't. But uncertainty can just continue. It can hang in the air for weeks, months, years. And when it lasts long enough, people stop trying to resolve it. They just adapt to it. They build their lives around not knowing, They make smaller plans. They take fewer risks. They become people who wait instead of people who act. A worker is told their company might be acquired. That was 2 years ago. It still hasn't happened. It might not happen, but no one says it's off the table. So the worker keeps living like it might happen. They don't buy a house because they might need to move. They don't take on a big project because the company might not exist next year. They don't invest in long-term relationships at work because everyone might be gone soon. None of this is irrational. They're responding to real uncertainty. But the uncertainty has now shaped their entire life. And it's been shaping it for 2 years. This is what happens when uncertainty never ends. It doesn't just keep people passive in the moment. It keeps them passive over time. It becomes a way of being. And the longer someone stays in that state, the harder it is to leave. Even if the uncertainty finally resolves, the habit of caution remains. The instinct to hold back remains. The belief that acting is risky remains. Uncertainty doesn't just pause people, it can reshape them. How to recognize when uncertainty is controlling you. Uncertainty is hard to see when you're inside it. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the background of your life. But there are signs. You find yourself waiting for permission you never actually asked for. You check your phone more often than you need to. You rehearse conversations in your head that never happen. You avoid making plans because you're not sure if they'll still make sense next week. You feel relief when someone else makes a decision, even if it's not the decision you wanted. You notice you're agreeing with things you don't actually agree with, just because disagreeing feels too uncertain. You feel like you're always a little behind, like you missed a meeting where everything was explained. These are the signs that uncertainty is running the show. Not fear, not anxiety, just a constant low-level not knowing that keeps you from moving forward. And the tricky part is that this can feel normal. It can feel like you're just being careful, just being smart, just waiting for the right moment. But if the right moment never comes, you're not waiting. You're stuck. What breaks the pattern? Uncertainty loses power when clarity shows up. Not certainty, clarity. Certainty means you know exactly what will happen. That's rare. Life doesn't offer much certainty. But clarity means you know what the situation is. You know what the options are. You know what's being decided and when. You know what you can control and what you can't. A manager tells their team, "We're reviewing the budget. The decision will be made by the end of the month. If it affects your project, I'll let you know within 2 days of the decision. If I don't reach out, your project is safe." That's not certainty. The team still doesn't know what will happen. But they know the timeline. They know how they'll find out. They know what silence means and what it doesn't mean. And with that clarity, they can move. They can make plans. They can stop checking their phones every hour. They can stop imagining the worst. The same is true in personal situations. A partner who says, "I don't know if I want to move, but I'll make a decision by June," is giving clarity. The other person still doesn't know the outcome, but they know when they'll know. And that's enough to let them plan. Clarity doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it contains it. It gives it a shape. And when uncertainty has a shape, it's easier to live with. How people reclaim agency. The other thing that breaks the pattern is action. Not big action, not dramatic action, just small acts of moving forward even when you don't have all the information. A person who's been waiting for their boss to clarify a vague directive finally decides to just move ahead with their best interpretation. They send an email saying, "Here's how I'm planning to approach this. Let me know if I'm off track." They don't wait for permission, they act and then invite feedback. That's a small shift, but it changes the dynamic. Instead of being stuck in uncertainty, they're creating clarity for themselves. They're making the uncertainty smaller by defining one piece of it. Another person has been waiting for a friend to decide if they want to meet up. The friend keeps saying maybe, and we'll see. Finally, the person says, "I'm going to be at the park Saturday at 2. If you want to come, I'd love to see you. If not, no worries." They stop waiting for the friend to decide. They make their own plan. The friend can join or not. But either way, the person isn't stuck anymore. This is what reclaiming agency looks like under uncertainty. It's not about demanding clarity from other people. It's about creating it for yourself. It's about acting on what you do know instead of waiting for what you don't. And when you do that, something shifts. The uncertainty is still there. But it's not controlling you anymore. You're moving through it instead of being frozen by it. How power moves through uncertainty. Here's what's important to understand about uncertainty as a form of power. It doesn't look like power. It doesn't feel like power. There's no aggression, no force, no commands. Just someone who knows something and someone who doesn't. And that difference is enough. The person who knows can move freely. They can make plans. They can take risks. They can decide when and what to share. They can change direction without warning. They have options. The person who doesn't know is always reacting, always waiting, always trying to read the situation, always adjusting. And the longer that dynamic continues, the more entrenched it becomes. The person who doesn't know starts to see the other person as the one who decides things, as the one who has control. Not because they demanded control, but because they had information and didn't share it. This is how authority forms without anyone assigning it. This is how someone becomes the boss of a relationship, a team, a situation, without ever being given that title. All they did was hold the map, and everyone else had to follow. Closing reflection. Uncertainty doesn't need to threaten you to control you. It doesn't need to be loud or harsh or obvious. It just needs to exist. And once it exists, it shapes everything. How you talk, how you wait, how you plan, how you move through the world. You start to treat every decision like it might be a mistake, every question like it might be too much, every plan like it might fall apart. And while you're doing that, you stop moving. Not because you're weak, not because you're afraid, but because you're trying to be smart, trying to be careful, trying not to make things worse. But staying still in uncertainty is its own kind of making things worse. Because the longer you wait, the more you adapt to waiting. And the more you adapt to waiting, the harder it is to act when clarity finally shows up. The next time you notice yourself holding back, ask yourself if you're responding to real danger or just to not knowing. Ask yourself if you're waiting for information or if you're waiting for permission. And if you're waiting for permission, ask yourself who you're waiting for and why you gave them that power. Because most of the time, uncertainty stays in control only because we let it. We let it make us smaller. We let it make us quieter. We let it keep us from asking the questions that would break the fog. And the moment you ask those questions, the moment you act even when you don't know everything, you take the power back. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to move, enough to plan, enough to stop living in the maybe and start living in the now. That's what breaks uncertainty, not confidence, not fearlessness. Just the decision to stop letting not knowing be the reason you don't act. You look around your life and you see all the places you've been waiting, and you realize that most of the things you're waiting for will never arrive on their own. Clarity doesn't just show up. You have to go get it. You have to ask for it. You have to create it when no one else will. And when you do, the fog doesn't disappear. But you stop standing still in it. You start walking. And you figure out the path as you go.